Owen Fallon's name appeared on more than 100 78 RPM records, but Discogs and some other websites speculate this guy may never have existed at all. Was Owen Fallon an actual band leader? Was he actually an anything? We'll find out today on the 78 RPM channel. Hello, and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. Whether you're new to 78s or an advanced collector, this is your source for information, research, and music about 78 RPM records, cylinders, and radio transcriptions. Hey gang, welcome to the 78 RPM channel. Recently I picked up a pretty good stack of records from a West Coast collection, and I was doing some research on some names I wasn't as familiar with. And while I was looking up information on Owen Fallon, I came across this. Owen Fallon is a bandleader of whom nothing is known. What? Just to add a little more fuel to the fire, I went to 45's World, and they speculate Owen Fallon was not a real bandleader at all. So are all of these 78 RPM discs you have that say Owen Fallon and his Californians, are those a filthy shellac lie? Well, I'm going to tell you this. If you have a disc that credits Owen Fallon, odds are you are indeed holding a piece of fiction. But contrary to the reports on Discogs and other sites, Owen Fallon and his Californians were in fact a real group. Owen Fallon and his orchestra were a regional West Coast unit. They kind of specialized in mid-tempo dance band stuff with a little bit of jazz thrown in for fun. Their actual recordings were done in the 1920s, but as a band, they were around into the 1930s, and they even appeared in a Vitaphone film, so they had to have been important at least on some level. However, discs that actually feature Owen Fallon and his orchestra, those are pretty rare, and it may have led to what I was reading about earlier on 45 World, speculating that he was not actually a real human being. While his last records were made in 1929, during the 1930s, hundreds of records that said Owen Fallon and his Californians were released to the public, mostly by ARC. And it doesn't take long to realize that pretty much every one of those recordings was a dirty lie. This page is taken from Johnson and Shirley's American Dance Bands on Record and Film, 1915 to 1942. This is only part of the list of discs that's attributed to Fallon's Californians, and none of them are him. Everyone from the ARC studio band to Ozzie Nelson, Gene Cardos, Irving Aronson, Benny Kruger, Adrian Rollini, they all released records as Owen Fallon and his Californians. So suddenly, the assertion I read earlier that Owen Fallon may not have been a real person, it actually starts to make a little bit of sense, as almost all of his recordings that are not rare are simply pseudonyms of other artists. Compounding the fact that most of these discs that say Owen Fallon and his Californians aren't really him is the fact that the ones that are going to be really tough to find. As I mentioned, Fallon's Californians were a regional West Coast band, and they appeared for the most part in Southern California. They appear in a lot of the local and regional trade publications as well, and that's how I found out information about these guys. The earliest thing I found was 1925, and they were appearing at the King's Dance Palace, and that was in February of 1925. By that November, they were appearing on the radio, on KNRC, during the Monday lunch hour. At some point, probably around 1926, they also added KFI radio to their lineup, with that show being at 5:30 p.m. During the summer of 1926, they were appearing at the Redondo Beach Ballroom. This was a nightly gig, and it probably provided them with a lot of repertoire that they needed, because that fall, they moved to the 7 p.m. time slot on the radio, and they were now filling an hour instead of just a 30-minute slot. In 1928, they found a home at the Cinderella Roof, which was changing, or maybe had changed their name by that point, to the Wilson's Ballroom. If you're familiar with the Cinderella Roof, it's probably because of Herb Wiedeff's Cinderella Roof Orchestra, which was the staple there for many years. Now, I'm not sure if the Cinderella Roof sold or if it perhaps changed its name after Wiedeff's death, since his group was so closely associated with the Cinderella Roof. In fact, Wiedeff's first recording for Brunswick was the Cinderella Blues. It was named for the venue and it became their theme song. In any event, Fallon and his Californians took over as the house band in the renamed Wilson Ballroom in downtown Los Angeles, and they had at least a 3-year run lasting into the early 30s. Their popularity in Los Angeles is probably what led to the band's name being used as a pseudonym on so many recordings. It's during this era where the only photos I could find of the group appear. This is an ad from Inside Facts of Stage and Screen magazine. They show the band, although sadly in very low resolution. The most notable photo to come out of that magazine, however, is this one. It pictures the group, but it also has Hollywood legend Joan Crawford. So if most of the records that are attributed to them aren't actually them, what do they sound like? Well, you know what? I'm glad you asked. The two commercial labels that the actual group appeared on, Sunset and Silver Screen. And if you know anything about 78 RPM records, you know those are tough labels to find, especially if you are not on the West Coast. I have one of their discs on the Sunset label, and it contains the song Darktown Shuffle. It should be noted this is the only actual Fallon side that appears in the jazz discography. The rest are considered dance band tunes. So here's a clip from Darktown Shuffle. I mentioned that Sunset and Silver Screen were the only two commercial labels that the actual group recorded for, but they were on a couple of others. First of all, they recorded for Vitaphone, and if you know anything about Vitaphone, that means that the soundtrack for the film was on discs. The name of the Vitaphone film is the Larry Saballo Review. Neither the film element or the soundtrack discs appear in the Vitaphone listings, which means that as of right now, apparently nobody has seen this, at least nobody that's probably still alive. So if you have either the film element or you have the soundtrack discs, let me know. I will put you in touch with preservationists. That doesn't mean you have to give up your discs. It doesn't mean you have to give up the film. It just means that we need to make sure that it's preserved, and maybe we can reunite the film with the audio, and we can make this viewable again. There was one final disc that this group appeared on, and this one is also tough to find. In November of 1929, the group entered Brunswick's Los Angeles studio, and they recorded 2 sides. Now, these sides were not released by Brunswick, but they were privately pressed by Fallon, probably to sell at the shows at the Wilson Ballroom. This disc features a custom Owen Fallon record label. Now, I would estimate that no more than 100 copies of this record still exist. In fact, of the discs out there that are actually this group, I would say none of them exist in more than about 100 copies. They are simply not very common. I'm going to play a clip from Shanghai Rose, and this will give you a little bit of insight into kind of a unique sound that these guys had in an era where trombones and trumpet and upright bass were the norm. This group had, I'm going to get this right, a euphonium, a flugelhorn, and the bass was an upright bass, but it was being played in a bowed fashion. It was being played like a classical bass. It kind of gave them a little bit of unique sound.
The love of Shanghai Rose.
Well, As I mentioned, discs that have Owen Fallon and his Californians on the label, not tough to find. Discs that are actually them, yeah, those can get pretty tough. But you do need to remember that they are out there, and Owen Fallon and his Californians were a real group, and in spite of what you read online, they did exist. I would like to point out one final thing before we go, and that is the fact that if you do find an Owen Fallon and his Californians disc that's not actually them, don't disregard it. There's some really good music that was recorded under that name, even though it's not actually them. I mentioned Benny Kruger and Adrian Rollini. Those guys are almost always worth listening to. So listen to them all, keep the ones you want, go find more. We'll talk to you next time on the 78 RPM channel.